High Admiral Ixera Voss stood before the Galactic Defense Council, her iridescent scales reflecting the soft blue light of the chamber. Her 4 eyes blinked in sequence as she delivered news that made even the most seasoned council members shift uncomfortably in their hover seats. "The swarm has breached the outer rim defenses," she announced, her translator converting her harmonic speech into standard galactic common. "3 colonial systems lost in the past solar cycle. Our conventional tactics are proving ineffective." The chamber erupted in a cacophony of translated voices, each counselor speaking in their native tongue. The swarm was supposed to be contained. The combined might of the Galactic Defense Force, with its millions of warriors from hundreds of species, had kept the silicon-based hive mind at bay for centuries. Supreme Counselor Zix 427, their crystalline form pulsing with concern, raised all 6 appendages for silence. "What of the new combat synthesis program?" Ixera's outer membrane rippled with discomfort. "That is why I am here. The human instructor has arrived." The words hung in the air like toxic gas. Humans, the newest species to join the Galactic Alliance, barely 2 centuries into space travel. Their worlds were mostly unformed, their technology borrowed, their bodies fragile. Yet they had insisted, demanded, even, that their combat techniques be integrated into the GDF's training program. Instructor Sarah Chen has been assigned to the Elite Combat Academy on Nexus Prime, Ixera continued. She arrives tomorrow. "A single human?" Counselor Drath rumbled, his massive form causing the reinforced floor to vibrate. "To train our most elite warriors. This is an insult." Ixera's scales shifted to a deeper blue. "The human comes highly recommended. Their species has developed something they call martial arts, combat techniques that apparently transcend physical limitations." "Impossible," Drath scoffed. "Combat is physics. Mass, velocity, force. These cannot be transcended." Nevertheless, Supreme Counselor Zix 427 interrupted. "We have agreed to this exchange. If there is even a chance these humans have developed techniques that might aid us against the swarm, we must investigate." As the meeting concluded, Ixera made her way to her private chamber aboard her flagship. The vessel's AI greeted her with a holographic display of the human instructor's file. Sarah Chen, 34 Earth years old. Multiple championships in various combat forms. Krav Maga, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, specialized in adapting human martial arts for non-human physiologies. The images showed a small figure, barely reaching the thorax of most GDF warriors. No natural armor, no enhanced musculature, no redundant organs or backup nervous system. Just soft flesh and determination. "Show me the combat footage," Ixera commanded. The holographic display shifted, showing Chen in various matches against other humans. The Admiral watched intently as the seemingly fragile instructor moved with impossible grace, redirecting force, finding leverage points, turning opponents' strength against them. It was like watching water flow around obstacles, adapting, seeking weakness, always in motion. But those were human opponents. How could such techniques work against a Vrachnid warrior with its chitinous armor, or a megalith trooper with its stone-like density, or, most importantly, against the crystalline drones of the swarm? A message notification pulsed. Chen's transport had arrived early. She was already at the academy. Ixera's scales rippled with resignation. "Send word to Combat Master Kral. Tell him to assemble the elite squadron for a demonstration tomorrow. Let us see what this human can really do." The next morning, Nexus Prime's 3 suns cast multiple shadows across the Academy's main training ground. 2,000 of the galaxy's finest warriors stood in perfect formation, their diverse forms a testament to the Alliance's unity. Combat Master Kral, his massive armored form towering over most others, waited at the center of the gathering. Sarah Chen walked onto the training ground alone. She wore simple black attire that covered most of her soft flesh and flat shoes that seemed to offer no protection. No weapons, no armor, no visible technology of any kind. Welcome to Nexus Prime. Krell's translator boomed. We are honored by your presence. The pause before honored was slight but noticeable. Chen bowed slightly, a human gesture of respect. The honor is mine, Combat Master. Shall we begin? Krell's outer armor plates shifted in what many species recognized as amusement. Of course, perhaps a demonstration. I have selected 10 of our finest warriors. They will attack with standard training protocols. Please defend yourself as best you can. Those gathered expected either protest or fear from the human. They saw neither. Chen simply nodded and moved to the center of the training ground. The 10 warriors, representing species from across the Alliance, took positions around her. What happened next would be recorded, studied, and debated for years to come. The first warrior, a Vrachnid female with natural armor capable of deflecting small arms fire, charged with perfect form. Chen stepped not back but forward, her hands moving in ways that seemed to defy physics. The Vrachnid's own momentum became her undoing. Her mass turned against her with subtle redirections. She crashed to the ground, joints locked in ways her species had never conceived possible. The others attacked in waves, each falling to techniques that seemed to ignore their natural advantages. A megalith trooper's density became a liability. A flux warrior's energy field was turned inward. A cyberned combat specialist found his enhanced reflexes predicted and countered before his neural processors could adapt. In less than 2 minutes, 10 of the galaxy's elite warriors lay disabled. Chen stood unchanged, her breathing only slightly elevated. The first lesson, she announced to the stunned silence, is that combat is not about strength. It's about understanding. Your bodies, your technologies, your natural advantages. These are all important, but they are tools, not solutions. True combat mastery begins when you stop relying on what you think makes you superior. She helped the Vrachnid warrior up with surprising gentleness. Your armor is impressive, but it made you overconfident. You move as if invulnerable, and that made you vulnerable. Ixora, watching from above, felt her scales shift through patterns she hadn't experienced since her own training days. It was the color pattern of revelation, of paradigm shattering. Perhaps, just perhaps, these humans had something to teach them after all. And given the reports from the outer rim, they needed to learn quickly. The swarm was coming, and all their traditional advantages had proved insufficient. They needed something new. They needed to learn how to fight like humans. The news of Sarah Chen's demonstration spread through the Galactic Defense Force like a quantum wave. Within days, the elite combat academy's training halls were filled with observers from every major military branch in the Alliance. Combat Master Krell found himself dealing with an unprecedented situation. A waiting list of elite warriors wanting to be humbled by a human. Chen stood in the center of the Academy's largest training chamber, surrounded by holographic displays showing various alien anatomies. She had spent the past week studying every species' physical structure, natural weapons, and combat tendencies. Now she faced her first real class. Combat is a universal language, she began, her voice carrying across the chamber. But most of you are speaking different dialects. You rely on what evolution or technology has given you, rather than understanding the fundamental principles that govern all movement. A megalith warrior, his crystalline form towering over the others, raised a geometrically perfect appendage. Our forms are proven through millennia of warfare. How can soft tissue techniques possibly improve upon natural armor and enhance strength? Chen smiled. An excellent question. Would you care to demonstrate? The megalith moved forward, his crystalline structure catching the light. He was 3 times her size, with a defensive capacity that could withstand direct energy weapon hits. The gathered warriors watched intently as Chen took a relaxed stance. Attack as you would in real combat, she instructed. Don't hold back. The megalith warrior launched forward with devastating force, his crystalline arms moving in traditional combat patterns optimized for his species. Chen moved like water around his strikes, never meeting force with force. Each time the megalith thought he had her cornered, she simply wasn't there. "Notice," she called out to the observers, even as she evaded another powerful strike, "how your colleague's attacks follow the natural geometry of his form. Beautiful, efficient, and completely predictable." Suddenly, Chen stepped inside the megalith's guard. Her movements became a blur, targeting points that seemed insignificant. The crystalline warrior found himself off balance, his perfect geometry working against him. With a series of precise strikes and leverage points, Chen sent him crashing to the ground. The chamber fell silent. The megalith lay there, his crystalline form undamaged, but his combat protocols thoroughly disrupted. "Your natural advantages are not weaknesses," Chen explained, helping the warrior up. "But they can become limitations if you let them define your entire approach to combat. True strength lies in adaptability." Over the next several hours, Chen worked with warriors from dozens of species. She showed how arachnid's multiple limbs could be used for subtle manipulation, rather than just brute force. She taught flux warriors to modulate their energy fields in ways their training had never considered. Each lesson broke down centuries of combat doctrine and rebuilt it with new understanding. High Admiral Ixera observed from her private viewing chamber, her scales shifting through thoughtful patterns. "Show me the latest swarm engagement footage," she commanded her eye. The holographic display split, showing Chen's training session alongside recent combat footage from the Outer Rim. The swarm's crystalline drones moved with horrible efficiency, their attacks following patterns that GDF warriors had found increasingly difficult to counter. But as Ixera watched Chen teach, she began to see something. The human's movements, her way of redirecting force, and finding unconventional angles of attack. They might work against the swarm's rigid geometric patterns. A priority communication interrupted her thoughts. Supreme Counselor 6427's crystalline form materialized in her chamber. "The swarm has accelerated its advance," the counselor announced without preamble. "3 more systems lost. Our defensive lines are adapting, but not quickly enough." Ixera's scales rippled with concern. "The human's techniques show promise, but training an entire army in these methods will take time. Time we may not have." 6427's form pulsed with urgent frequencies. "There is another option. The humans have proposed a joint operation. They want to send a small team of their elite warriors to work directly with our forces on the front lines." "Impossible," Ixera responded immediately. "Human bodies cannot withstand frontline combat against the swarm. The casualty rate would be—" "They are aware of the risks," 6427 interrupted. "In fact, they specifically requested the most dangerous assignments. Their reasoning is that it's the fastest way to prove the effectiveness of their combat methods." Back in the training chamber, Chen was working with a young flux warrior who had shown particular aptitude for the new techniques. The warrior's energy field, usually maintained as a rigid defensive shell, now flowed and shifted like liquid light. "Your greatest strength," Chen explained to the class, "isn't in your natural weapons or defenses. It's in your ability to learn, to adapt, to overcome your own preconceptions about what is possible." She gestured to the flux warrior, whose movements now contained elements of human martial arts, blended seamlessly with his species' traditional forms. "Look at what your colleague has achieved in just 1 session. Now imagine what we could accomplish together, combining the best aspects of all our combat traditions." A junior officer rushed into the chamber, heading straight for Combat Master Krall. After a brief exchange, Krall's armored form shifted in what those who knew him recognized as grave concern. "Instructor Chen," he called out, his translator barely keeping up with his rapid speech patterns. "The swarm has broken through the Outer Rim defenses. They're advancing on populated systems." Chen's expression remained calm, but her eyes intensified. "Then we need to accelerate our training program. Combat Master, with your permission, I'd like to implement some unconventional teaching methods." Krell's armor plates shifted again, this time in grim agreement. "At this point, Instructor, I believe we are open to anything you can teach us." The human smiled, and there was something in that expression that made even the most hardened warriors pay attention. It was the look of someone who had been holding back, waiting for the right moment to reveal what they were truly capable of. "Good," Chen said, "because what I'm about to show you will change everything you think you know about combat." Sarah Chen sat cross-legged in her quarters aboard the Elite Combat Academy station, reviewing holographic footage of the latest swarm attacks. Her small meditation space contrasted sharply with the vast, technologically advanced chambers preferred by most alien species. A soft chime announced a visitor. "Enter," she called, not looking up from the shifting crystalline patterns of the swarm's formations. High Admiral Ixura's iridescent form flowed into the room, her scales adjusting to the dimmer lighting. "The Council has received your proposal, Instructor Chen. They find it concerning, but not surprising," Chen replied, finally looking up. The dark circles under her eyes betrayed long hours of study. "You've seen the latest reports. The swarm is adapting faster than we anticipated." Ixura's scales shifted through patterns of agreement and worry. "Your suggestion to form an immediate response team, mixing human martial artists with our elite warriors, it's unprecedented. Many believe it's suicide." Chen stood, her movements fluid despite her obvious fatigue. She gestured to the holographic display. "The swarm operates on perfect geometric patterns, each drone an extension of their collective consciousness. But look here." She highlighted a section where swarm formations had shifted to counter standard GDF tactics. "They're learning our traditional combat methods. We need to show them something they've never seen before." "Which brings us to the challenge," Ixura said. "The Council won't commit resources to your joint task force without proof that your methods can work against the swarm's drone units." A slight smile crossed Chen's face. "Let me guess. Combat Master Kral has arranged a demonstration. Tomorrow, you and your chosen team against combat drones programmed with actual swarm battle data. The entire Council will observe." The next morning, the Academy's largest combat chamber had been transformed. Crystalline structures mimicking swarm architecture jutted from floors and walls. Combat drones, their forms precisely matching swarm units, stood ready in perfect geometric formations. Chen had selected 5 warriors for her team. The young Flux warrior who had shown such aptitude, a Vrachnid specialist in close-quarters combat, a Megalith heavy assault expert, and 2 others chosen for their ability to adapt quickly to new techniques. They stood together, an oddly mismatched group compared to the usual perfectly ordered GDF units. Combat Master Krell's voice boomed through the chamber. "The parameters are simple. Your team must penetrate swarm defensive formations and reach the central control node. The drones are programmed with actual combat data from recent engagements. They will not hold back." The assembled council members watched from secure observation pods. Supreme Counselor Zix-427's crystalline form pulsed with anticipation. "Begin." The drones activated simultaneously, their crystalline forms humming with deadly energy. They moved in the precise, geometric patterns that had proven so devastating on the battlefield. But Chen's team didn't meet them head-on as traditional GDF tactics would dictate. Instead, they flowed like water around the swarm formations. The Flux warrior's energy field rippled in unexpected patterns, creating gaps in the drone's perfect geometry. The Vrachnid moved through these gaps with impossible grace, her natural armor now used for precise deflection rather than pure defense. Chen herself seemed to dance between the drones, her movements disrupting their formations in ways that created opportunities for her teammates. The Megalith warrior, instead of using his crystalline form as a battering ram, applied precise pressure to key structural points in the drone formations. "Observe," Ixura commented to her fellow council members, her scales bright with excitement. "They're not trying to overpower the swarm's formations. They're introducing chaos into their ordered systems." The drones attempted to adapt, their collective programming shifting to counter the new threats. But every time they established a new pattern, Chen's team would change their approach. The Flux Warrior's energy field pulsed in rhythm with Chen's movements, creating interference patterns that the drones couldn't predict. The Vracnid and Megalith coordinated their attacks in ways that defied traditional combat algorithms. Suddenly, a drone broke through, its crystalline form slashing toward Chen's exposed back. The council members tensed, expecting disaster. But the human instructor dropped and rolled, redirecting the drone's momentum into another group of units. The resulting cascade of collisions created a perfect opening for her team. "Now," Chen called out. Her warriors moved as one, each applying their unique abilities in perfect harmony with human martial arts principles. They carved a path through the remaining drones, reaching the central control node with an efficiency that left the observers stunned. As the simulation powered down, silence fell over the chamber. Chen's team stood together, barely breathing hard, surrounded by deactivated drone units. Their victory was undeniable. Supreme Counselor Zix 427 spoke first, their crystalline form vibrating with rare emotion. "It would seem, Instructor Chen, that we owe you an apology. Your methods are more than we anticipated." "Not my methods," Chen corrected respectfully. "Our methods. What you've seen today isn't just human martial arts. It's what happens when we combine our different approaches, when we learn from each other." The young Flux Warrior stepped forward, his energy field still rippling with excitement. "The human techniques don't replace our natural abilities. They enhance them. Show us how to use what we have in ways we never imagined." High Admiral Ixura's scales had settled into the deep blue of decision. "The Joint Task Force is approved. Instructor Chen, you'll have whatever resources you need." Her outer membrane rippled with what might have been amusement. "Though I suspect you'll need fewer resources than we initially budgeted for." But Chen wasn't celebrating yet. She pulled up a holographic display of the outer rim. "We need to move quickly. The swarm isn't going to wait while we train more teams." She highlighted several systems in the swarm's path. "These colonies have less than a standard cycle before contact. We need to be ready." Combat Master Krull, who had watched the entire demonstration in silence, finally spoke. "Then we begin immediately. I want every warrior in this academy studying these techniques. The swarm believes it has mastered our combat patterns." His armor plates shifted in what had become his version of a smile. "Let's show them how unpredictable we can be." The emergency alert shattered the pre-dawn quiet of Nexus Prime's third moon. Sarah Chen and her joint task force were already in motion before the second tone sounded. They had been preparing for this moment for weeks, but the swarm had arrived sooner than anyone expected. Multiple breach points detected in the Helios sector. The AI announced as Chen and her team boarded their assault carrier. Swarm formations showing new attack patterns. Standard GDF containment protocols failing. The young Flux Warrior, now designated Combat Specialist Zara, manifested complex energy patterns that reflected his anxiety. "They're testing the outer colony's defenses, just like you predicted, Instructor." Chen nodded as she checked her tactical display. The swarm's crystalline drones had indeed adapted faster than the Council's models had predicted. But so had her warriors. "All teams, combat formation Sigma 3, she commanded. "Remember your training. The swarm expects geometric patterns and predictable responses. We give them neither." High Admiral Ixura's holographic form appeared in the carrier's command center. "The Council has granted your task force full operational authority, Instructor Chen. But be warned, we're detecting unusual configurations in the swarm's advance units. They've evolved since our last encounter." "Good," Chen replied, surprising the Admiral. "That means they're learning. Learning means they can be confused, disrupted, defeated." She turned to her team. "You all know the stakes. The colonies in the Helios sector have no significant defensive capabilities. If we fail, millions of lives are lost." The Vracnid warrior, her chitinous armor now modified with flexible joints based on human martial arts principles, clicked her mandibles in determination. "We will not fail, Instructor. The swarm has never faced warriors like us. Their carrier emerged from hyperspace into chaos. The Helios sector's main colony world burned with crystalline fires where swarm units had already made planetfall. Traditional GDF units fought bravely, but were being systematically overwhelmed by the swarm's perfect geometric attacks. "Deploy in sectors," Chen ordered as their ship descended through the atmosphere. "Zara, take your team to the northern continent. Vracnid team to the central defense hub. Megalith squad, reinforce the southern perimeter." She paused, watching the tactical display. "I'll take the rest to evacuate the civilian centers." They moved into action with practiced precision. Zara's team, their energy fields pulsing with unpredictable patterns, disrupted swarm formations before they could establish their deadly geometric links. The Vracnid warriors used their modified armor in ways that turned the swarm's own crystalline structures against them. Chen led her group through the burning streets of the main colony city. Swarm drones attacked in perfect formations, their crystalline bodies refracting the fires around them. But Chen's warriors moved like water through their ranks, each species applying their natural abilities in ways the swarm's collective consciousness couldn't predict. Central Plaza secured, Chen reported as her team created a safe corridor for evacuating civilians. "Zara, status." The young Flux warrior's voice crackled through the comm. "Northern continent holding, instructor, but the swarm is changing. Their formations are becoming more fluid. They're trying to adapt to our techniques." Chen smiled grimly. "As expected. Initiate Phase 2. Across the battlefield, her warriors began shifting their tactics. The Flux team's energy patterns became even more chaotic, introducing random variables that disrupted the swarm's attempts to analyze and counter their movements. The Vracnid squad switched from defensive to offensive configurations with no discernible pattern. Even the Megalith warriors, traditionally the most rigid in their combat approaches, flowed between different fighting styles like liquid crystal. But the swarm was indeed learning. Their drones began splitting into smaller units, attempting to counter the humans' emphasis on adaptability with sheer numbers. Several of Chen's warriors fell back, overwhelmed by the new tactics. "They're trying to force us into defensive patterns," Chen observed. "Make us predictable." She opened a channel to all teams. "Remember your training. The moment you become predictable, you become vulnerable. Move like water, strike like lightning, adapt like life itself." High Admiral Ixura's voice cut through the tactical chatter. "Instructor Chen, we're detecting a major power surge in the swarm's command node. They're attempting something we've never seen before." The sky above the colony darkened as thousands of swarm drones merged into a single, massive crystalline structure. It pulsed with alien energy, its geometric patterns shifting in ways that defied physics. "All units, fall back to defensive positions," the GDF command ordered. "Belay that," Chen countermanded. "This is our chance. The swarm thinks bigger means better, more perfect geometry equals more power. They're making themselves vulnerable." She highlighted tactical points on the shared display. "Zara, gather all Flux warriors. I want maximum energy interference patterns here and here. Vracnid teams, prepare for close assault on my mark. Megalith squad, stand ready to strike these structural points." The massive swarm construct descended toward the colony, its crystalline surface reflecting the fires below. It was beautiful in its alien perfection, a testament to the power of unified geometry and collective consciousness. But it had never faced the controlled chaos of human martial arts combined with alien abilities. Chen's voice rang out across all channels. "Remember, perfection is predictable. Life is not. Now show them what true adaptation looks like." The battle for the Helios sector was about to enter its final phase, and with it, perhaps the future of the entire war against the swarm hung in the balance. The massive crystalline construct of merged swarm drones loomed over the Helios colony like an artificial moon, its surface reflecting the chaos below. But Sarah Chen saw something in its perfect geometric patterns that gave her hope. The very perfection of its form was its weakness. All units in position, Zara reported, his energy field pulsing with controlled chaos. Around him, dozens of flux warriors had formed a web of interconnected energy patterns, each vibrating at carefully calculated random frequencies. Chen's voice was steady as she gave the order. Begin disruption sequence. Remember, we're not trying to match their power. We're introducing entropy into their system. The flux warriors' energy fields erupted in a dazzling display of controlled disorder. The patterns seemed random, but were actually following principles derived from human martial arts. The art of turning an opponent's strength against them, scaled up to an astronomical level. The swarm construct shuddered, its perfect crystalline surface developing microscopic imperfections as it tried to compensate for the energy interference. Exactly as Chen had predicted, its attempt to adapt only made it more vulnerable. Vracnid teams, you have your opening. Strike now. Squadrons of Vracnid warriors, their modified armor allowing for movements that would have been impossible weeks ago, launched themselves at the construct. They targeted the spreading imperfections with precise strikes, each impact calculated to propagate structural weaknesses through the crystalline matrix. High Admiral Ixura's voice cut through the tactical chatter. Remarkable. The swarm's collective consciousness is trying to redistribute its drone components to compensate, but your warrior's attacks aren't following any pattern it can predict. That's because they're not following a pattern at all, Chen replied, watching her tactical display intently. They're feeling the flow of combat, adapting moment by moment. Like water wearing away stone, no two strikes exactly the same. The massive construct began to fracture, its perfect geometry disrupted by thousands of precisely imperfect attacks. But the swarm wasn't finished. The structure suddenly burst apart, its component drones attempting to reform into smaller, more manageable units. Phase 3, Chen commanded. Megalith Squad, show them what you've learned about fluid combat. The Megalith warriors moved with grace that seemed impossible for their crystalline forms. They engaged the separating swarm drones not with traditional brute force, but with techniques that blended their natural strength with human principles of movement and leverage. Each warrior flowed through enemy formations like living mercury, their supposedly rigid bodies demonstrating impossible flexibility. Amazing. Supreme Counselor Zix 427's holographic form appeared beside Chen. They move like humans, Chen suggested with a slight smile. No, Counselor. They move like themselves. They've just learned to see their own capabilities in a new way. The battle reached its crescendo as the remaining swarm units attempted one final desperate reconfiguration. But they were caught between the Flux Warriors' chaos fields, the Vracnid team's precise strikes, and the Megalith Squad's fluid assault. Their perfect geometric patterns shattered, unable to adapt to the combined unpredictability of their opponents. Hours later, as Helios's primary sun rose over the battlefield, Chen stood with her warriors amid the scattered remnants of crystalline drones. The colony had been saved, but more importantly, they had proven something that would change the course of the war. High Admiral Ixura's actual form arrived on the surface, her scales shifting through patterns of amazement and respect. The Council has reviewed the battle data, Instructor Chen. They've ordered immediate implementation of your training methods across all GDF forces. Chen looked at her team. The young Flux warrior Zara, now confident in abilities he never knew he had. The Vracnid warriors, their natural armor modified to allow for movements their species had never attempted. The Megalith Squad, their crystalline forms now capable of fluid grace that seemed to defy their very nature. The training will take time, she cautioned. What we achieved here wasn't just about learning new fighting techniques. It was about learning to see beyond our own limitations, real or imagined. We have already begun constructing new training facilities, Combat Master Krell announced, his massive form approaching the group. The academy will be transformed. No longer will we teach only traditional combat forms. We will teach adaptation itself. The swarm will adapt to these tactics eventually, Chen warned. They're already learning, evolving. Good, Zura said, his energy field pulsing with confidence. Because so are we. Every time they adapt, we'll have new challenges to overcome, new ways to blend our different abilities. Chen smiled at her students' understanding. This was what she had hoped for from the beginning. Not just teaching new combat techniques, but inspiring a new way of thinking about combat itself. The Galactic Defense Force would never be the same. The Council has one more announcement, Ixura said, her scales shifting to formal patterns. They are establishing a new division within the GDF, the Adaptive Combat Corps. They want you to lead it. Instructor Chen, not just as a teacher, but as full combat master. Chen looked at her warriors, seeing the pride and determination in their various alien features. They had proven that the galaxy's greatest strength lay not in perfection, but in diversity. Not in rigid adherence to tradition, but in the willingness to learn and adapt. I accept, she said finally, on one condition, that we remember what really made this victory possible. Not human techniques alone, not alien abilities alone, but the willingness to learn from each other, to adapt, to grow. As the sun rose higher over the Helios colony, casting multiple shadows through the crystalline debris of the battlefield, Chen saw not just the end of a battle, but the beginning of a new era. The swarm had sought perfection through uniformity and rigid patterns. They would learn, as all the galaxy would learn, that true strength came from embracing imperfection, celebrating differences, and finding unity in diversity. The war was far from over, but for the first time, Chen felt certain of its outcome. After all, how could a force seeking perfect order ever triumph over the beautiful chaos of life itself?